Gem was a really cool idea that was originally created by a man named Bill Sanders, who brought it to Hasbro. The original idea was that there was a boy band and they were superheroes on the side, they had secret identities, and then it went through some process of development at Hasbro and it became a girl band.
Hasbro saw an opening in the market, they felt, for a character doll like Barbie, but a doll that was more contemporary, more attractive, had more attitude, had a personality that was in the rock and roll style of what was going on in the world that day.
Hasbro created the idea of Gem and the holograms and the Misfits, and they were bringing out the dolls for them, and they wanted to do a television series, and they asked us to develop it.
Right about the end of 1984, they said, well, we have this opportunity for you. And they called me in and sat me down and said, well, we have this show we would like you to actually develop for us. And I said, great, oh, this is amazing. I mean, for me, this is just an amazing breakthrough opportunity. It's like a first chance to get to do something like this.
Thank you. I'm Gem, and these are the holograms.
I met Joe Bacal, Tom Griffith, Jay Bacal, and Carol Weitzman, and these were kind of the four key people at the top that I was dealing with, but mostly I dealt with Jay Bacal.
Jay Bacal was also the creative director on Gem, but he was also the creative director on G.I. Joe and Transformers, and he hired Christy because of her great love of comics and comic adventures and her gift for storytelling to write some of the G.I. Joe stories. So when Hasbro decided to launch Gem, he recommended Christy as the perfect person to do the Gem Bible, which meant, developing all the characters that Hasbro had originally created, but in a way that really gave them depth and made them be able to be really compelling in the telling of stories.
I was told that there was a toy line, this line of dolls, but I never saw them. So basically, it was weird because I kind of creating in the dark. I didn't have any visual reference, and I'm very much a visual storyteller. And of course, it's animation, so it's a very visual form of storytelling. So I started thinking about the basic underlying concepts they had given me. The good girl group, the bad girl group, the person who changes her identity, and she does it by these earrings, and she has this computer called Synergy. She has this boyfriend, Rio. Kimber is her sister. And that was kind of it. That was the basic setup. And so from that, I had to fully create all the characters, give them just a complete biography, decide who they were, what relationships they had. I came up with Starlight Music, I came up with Starlight House and the Foster Girls and all of that idea. I came up with Eric Raymond, the villain, and who he was and his relationship to everything. I came up with the romantic triangle, the fact that Rio is torn between the two women and it doesn't know who is who, and just fully fleshing out what the underlying ideas that would carry it through 65 half hours of animation, because that's a lot of animation. And you need a concept that's really going to carry it through.
If Gem wins, you get Starlight Music. But if the Misfits win, Starlight Music is mine.
I accept that challenge.
The other thing about development, especially with dolls or toys of any kind, the names kept changing because they're going through the product name development at Hasbro's end. So, suddenly she starts out being M instead of Gem. She starts being Misty and then Morgan. So for the longest time as I was doing development, it was M, the rock star.
We had already presented a demo recording of the opening song, and they really loved it. And it was with M, and they said, well, look, come up with a new name, Joe, but if you can make it work with the existing song, then that would be terrific if it could fit right into it. So I thought about it, and I said, okay, I came up with the idea of Gem, and I called up the composers, and I said, all right, let's revise the demo so we can present it so they can really hear it within the structure of the lyric, and so we did that, and they really liked it, and they agreed Gem was a great name, and so that we went on from there.
This would happen all the time. As they continued their product development, these names would keep shifting and changing. I think the only character that didn't actually undergo a name change at some point was Rio, the boyfriend, and Pizzazz, the lead singer of the Misfits.
What's your hurry?
We're gonna win, Rio.
I could do great things for you. Dump Gem and I'll...
You aren't fit to breathe the same air as Gem.
I kept asking and asking and asking to see what the dolls looked like, because I draw from that kind of visual inspiration, even though I'm still just creating characters that work and that mesh. Nonetheless, having the visual inspiration really helps a lot, especially for someone like me, because I think visually. So I kept asking and asking, and finally, eventually, I got Polaroids of the prototypes of the dolls. Gradually, I got more and more photos, so I got a much better sense of the fashions and the dolls and their look and the play sets and all the various things that were going to be a part of this, and I could just work it all in and make it mesh.
Outrageous! There's enough gear here to start a dozen rock groups.
And now, your father's final gift.
Oh, wow!
Sunbow philosophy, they didn't really come out of the old school of animation. I mean, it wasn't like artists deciding how they could best make, these characters, squash and stretch, do the traditional animation thing. A lot of us came out of having more of an appreciation for like live action stuff. I mean, G.I. Joe was sort of based on James Bond, I mean, it was like we weren't approaching it as if it were a, typical cartoon show. We were approaching it as if we were doing, adventure stories or, stories about these characters. The further we got along and the more the characters developed, the more we could sort of get a little more soap opera-ish and do a little more with the characters and do some untraditional things and not have it just be the action-adventure stuff.
The heart of Gem is the character relationships. Everything in Gem is built around the character relationships. Essentially, Gem is a soap opera.
There was the villains, the misfits, and the evil owner of the record company that was backing the misfits and trying to take over.
Romance and fashion and everything else laid on it, and the romantic triangle built into it.
So there was all this stuff going on that was really exciting, and so there were cliffhangers and everything like that, and what's going to happen next, that whole feeling.
Kimber! Swim in fast! Swim in!
What? Oh, Steve! Help!
It's very glamorous because it's like you have a $1 zillion budget.
I sure hope this is the right way.
Unbelievable! Gem is back in the race!
This series had adventure, it had excitement, it had chases, it had explosions, it had motorcycles, it had all sorts of action, but also filled with glamour, style, beautiful looking characters, female attitudes and personalities that the girls could emulate and we're seeing in the rest of the culture emerging at that time.
For a young girl growing up, it was like terrific. It was so exciting to see what that world of somebody who was a famous rock star would look like and what kinds of things could happen and what dangers she could encounter and how she would get over it. And she looked so glamorous and her hair was never out of place.
Oh, Jerica, I was afraid I'd lost you.
I knew you'd find us, Rio.
What Gem did was give us a chance to bring that kind of spirit and focus and drive in storytelling to a property that would attract, we felt, a really broad girl audience and yet still not chase the boys away.
When Gem first aired, in fact, it was a single segment in a half-hour show, and it started out with some kind of a boy show, and then there was Gem in the middle segment, and then it ended with another piece of a boy show.
It was Gem, Inhumanoids, and Bigfoot. And then as the years went by, they would rotate other elements in and out of it.
It was called Super Sunday or Super Saturday, depending on where it aired. So Gem was sandwiched. It was like an 11-minute segment sandwiched in between these two boys' shows, which made it an odd fish out. It was really strange. And one of the big concerns that Hasbro and the producers had about it was they wanted to make sure the boys didn't change the channel when Gem came on. So you have what they think are the little boys watching the show, and then suddenly Gem comes on, and it's like they want the little sisters to come and watch, and they don't want the boys to change the channel. So it ended up being this very interesting approach of the stuff that would appeal to the girls, but also stuff that would keep the boys from changing the channel.
Hey, they want their junk back. Let them have it. We're gonna hit the cliff!
Gem was unusual in that we were operating West Coast and East Coast. Sunbow was in New York. So the main people that I dealt with were actually in New York. And then I was dealing with people that were all over the place, LA and everywhere, and I lived a little bit outside of LA at the time. So much of what we did was through, I can't even say email because this was actually before email. We were unusual in that, thanks to Steve Gerber, who I mentioned as part of G.I. Joe, when I started writing on G.I. Joe, Steve said, you have to write on a computer, and you have to send me your stuff via a BBS, a bulletin board system, which is sort of the precursor of the net and a precursor of email, were these bulletin board systems where you communicated over a modem, which was a big deal back then. And he was one of the first people to do that, and he was the person that forced me to have to start writing on a computer. I had to literally go out, buy a computer, learn how to use a computer, learn how to use a modem, learn how to send things electronically, which was very, very different back then. It was not the way people had done things before at all. And so I had gotten past that challenge, but things were still pretty crude. We still would send scripts by courier back and forth, when it was really a rush. People were still learning the whole process of how you exchange things electronically and having to deal with electronic formats and all of that sort of thing. So there were interesting challenges that made this different than it wasn't just a simple day in the life kind of a situation.
My hats are off to Christy because it was just a great show. It's a great job, and she set the foundation right.
You will find instructions in the earring box. Follow them.
There's nothing there.
I am waiting for you, Jerica.
Well, let's go.
The process of writing animation follows a certain simple set of steps that you do. It was very typical first to come up with a premise. A premise could be a paragraph, a premise could be 2 pages. The premise basically laid out your basic idea of the story, what the episode was going to be about, the basic actions of the episode and so forth. So that would go back to the people in New York, it'd go to Hasbro, and they would come back with their notes, their ideas. You'd go back and forth quite a bit, and that would get fleshed out a bit more or changed, tweaked, whatever, and so you would develop that premise. Then from the premise, you go to the outline. So you write out an outline, which is pretty much a beat by beat what happens, broken out into the 3 acts of the show. And then that would go back and forth, and you get more notes, and you make more changes, and you make more revisions because writing is rewriting. So you go back and forth. And then once the outline gets past all of the approval stages and everybody's happy with that, and you have your notes on that, then you go to your first draft script, write the first draft script, turn it in, go through the notes, go through the revisions, go through the writing, turn in a second draft, maybe turn in a polish, whatever.
The scripts were really good, and from the first one, you could just tell it was something special and something different.
I remember how it all began with the unexpected death of my father.
I've always thought, story-wise, that first story arc that they did on the Super Sunday, that was the origin, was just brilliant. I mean, it was really the closest thing to a comic book that anybody had done for TV at that point. It was even closer than like the G.I. Joes and Transformers.
When you're writing for animation, your dialogue has to be more naturalistic. I think some people who have gone from comics into film or comics into animation, sometimes their dialogue is just too over the top and too non-realistic.
Roger Slifer was also a writer and an editor and a story editor on the Gem series.
Christy was by far the most prolific writer. I think she wrote 23 of the scripts, and Roger wrote 7, which was more than really anyone else in terms of the 65 that we did.
You also have to write less, because in comics you can cover a lot of the page with words, and in animation you always have to be conscious of what you're dealing with in real time, and everything you say has to be succinct because you've only got 22 minutes to tell the story, and you've got to try to be as tight as possible.
Since when are you interested in skiing, Eric?
I'm interested in anything that turns a profit. I'm even willing to take Franklin's problem resort off his hands.
He brought a lot of to the characters and the idiosyncrasies of each character, and he was very involved in that, and so he made a real contribution to it as well.
As you become aware of the characters and the actors, you're kind of writing to that. I like the character Kimber a lot, and I used her a lot in my stories, and I would certainly hear her voice in my head when I was doing her dialogue or doing how I imagined it.
Sean?
Yes?
I just want you to know how much I like you, and how much I enjoy working with you.
I like you too, Kimber. I really do.
And again, that's why I think the show, as you go on, it really develops, and you see, the characters become more and more involved. I think it's because the writers are reacting to what they've heard, and the actress and actors are getting used to the characters and getting used to the kind of dialogue they're given.
What's wrong with the color? I think it's pretty.
It's very pretty, Shayna, but that's not the point. The logo has to complement the color of our outfits.
Okay, you're the boss.
Shayna, I don't want you to do something just because I'm the boss.
In a lot of ways, I enjoyed writing, the Misfits more than Jem, because they were just so over the top and so much fun to work with.
We've got to get in there.
We will.
How?
It's an auto club, right? Well, we'll take a car and crash it.
But won't that ruin our car?
We're not gonna use our car, you idiot. Look, the Rockin' Roadster. All right.
One of the truly unique elements of Jem, of course, is the music. We knew from the very beginning that there were going to be musical numbers in the scripts. This was the time period of MTV. MTV had hit and was big, really big, and so it was having a tremendous impact, which people nowadays probably would not even understand what kind of an impact it was having, but this was a big new thing. And all of these stars were putting their videos in MTV and having a huge impact. So this was a key part of the show, and a key part of the development of the show is that we would have musical numbers. One of the things I did have to do as I was writing the scripts was work out where the song would fit in. And it's a matter of figuring out what is the good moment in this act, in each act. So in the half hour, when you have 3 acts, you would have typically like a Jem song, a Misfit song, a Jem song, or some mix like that. So it wasn't always Jem because there had to be Misfits music in there, so it had to balance out. And you would have to decide in each act, what is the best moment, where's the best place to put a musical number that fits in and doesn't interrupt the action so much as enhance the action, carry through an emotional beat, carry through a concept, tell a piece of the story.
Who is he kissing? Is it me? Or is he making love to a fantasy? Who is he kissing? Wish I knew what he's thinking of when he looks into my eyes.
Barry Harman is an amazingly talented, creative person, and he wrote all of the lyrics for the Jem shows. And that meant writing 3 songs per show for 65 shows.
With Jem, there were usually 3 suggested song areas. Sometimes they suggested titles. If I liked them, I used them. If not, I made up my own.
I would give a pretty strong sense of, conceptually, here's what the lyrics would be. Here, maybe here's a key phrase for those lyrics. Here are images for those lyrics. About a paragraph, maybe. I didn't try to go much beyond a paragraph.
Sometimes there would be revisions afterwards when the script came out differently, and they said, well, that was a good idea when we started, but now the script has changed, so that song can't be used anymore.
But I tried to give the composer and the people who write the lyrics a good, strong sense of what those lyrics should be, what they should be about, either thematically or even specifically.
Give me a gimmick to make them pay attention. Give me a gimmick to add a new dimension. Give me a gimmick, something bizarre, something that tells them that I am a star. Give me a gimmick, give me a gimmick.
We were getting shows out like every week, so you can imagine in the production process, how quickly they had to be turning stuff around and getting us, tapes and, getting our feedback and all the other stuff. I mean, it was a very, very hectic time.
Side by side together, standing tall together, full of pride together, we're putting it all together.
They just did a wonderful job of, coming up with all the different songs and all the different riffs and all the different types of styles that they did. It was just amazing, I thought.
Jazz has the sound of St. Louis blues.
And then they would record, the actual artist.
I remember when I went in for the audition, I had a cold, and they had me sing the theme song. I just figured that they would have me re-sing it because it sounds like I have a cold. Although sometimes that sounds okay. But they kept that, so that is the theme song, my audition.
Truly outrageous was a phrase that I came up with for it, and it was the one that sort of defined Jem's attitude and the show's attitude as well. So I was really pleased that everyone seemed to catch on with that, and they wrote a great music to that, and it really was very hooky. So really clever.
We would go in and they would play me the song, the recording, and then they would play it on the piano and just sort of go over the melody with me. And we would record it. Sometimes it would be really quickly, and other times it would take a little time because I had to sing really high.
It didn't have to end like this. We would have found another way somehow. If only you had turned to me. But I'm afraid it's too late now. It's too late now.
I will admit that when I first read the scripts, I didn't quite see how all of it was going to work. The characters were very in your face, and I thought they might be unlikable, but animation sort of helps that, smooth that over. And I soon found actually that I enjoyed writing for the villains more than the goody-goody girls. They had sort of more spirit, more spunk. Then new singing groups were introduced, so there were different styles of writing that we did.
Are you feeling alright? You seem uptight. What's making you act this way? You're so out of sync. I don't know what to think. Are you feeling alright?
The original idea behind the Misfits was that they were sort of a female version of Clash, and you know, that was very popular at the time. We did not mirror that musically or lyrically, but that was sort of in the back of our heads. And seeing it come to life, and that the songs actually worked within the framework of the story, even though they totally went away from the story and became sort of fantastical in the way they were portrayed.
Lovesick, I better get to bed. Lovesick, I got it bad, and that ain't good. That ain't good. Lovesick.
The other thing that I did, which sort of distinguishes Jem from most pop songs at that time, is it bothers me as a lyricist when words don't rhyme correctly. So I sort of insisted on never using false rhymes. I mean, now in pop and rock music, that's all they do. But at that time, being an advocate of Stephen Sondheim and lyricists like that, I was fairly specific about not doing that. I didn't think kids should hear words and think that mind and time really rhyme, since they don't. So that was one thing that I brought to it.
Don't like the way I act. Girl, you better face the fact. You can wait a long while. I'm not about to change my style.
Then what got tricky, after about the first year, they decided they wanted to reuse some of the songs. So now there's another layer here of difficulty, because you have to look at all of the songs that have been created, and you have this long list of the Jem songs and the Misfit songs and so forth. And then as you're writing, you're like, well, okay, we want to reuse probably at least one song per episode or something like that. What song can I pull that already exists that is still going to fit into this current story that I'm doing? So this became very tricky too, because the writers then are having to think about reuse. You know, and something may not be perfectly right for what you're writing right now, but nonetheless, you have to find a way to reuse the song. So I think we did a pretty good job of that, actually.
I hope you like surprises, 'cause there's one coming at you. Surprise, surprise, surprise. If you're wise, you get out of my way. Surprise, 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 surprise.
What we found as the show was going on, in terms of writing, was that it was really important for the lyrics to suggest something physical, because all the songs were done as videos.
Totally awesome, stylish and hip, stopping traffic on Sunset Strip. Hey, look, it's Jem, Hollywood Jem, doing the talk shows, posing for stills, going to parties in Beverly Hills.
One of the things that was really stunning about the show when I first saw it was this emergence of the videos and the really higher quality of animation and the special animation and the attitude of that as this popped on the screen. And we could see what we were setting here was a really high standard of musical entertainment.
I gave a lot of thought to how these musical numbers could play out, and I even wrote a memo at one point saying we want to have a lot of MTV effects, you know, and cutting and fast editing and fast pacing and all these kind of things, and try to make it as much like a real music video as we can within the limitations of animation, of course.
Really, in the animation that preceded Jem, music was an accompaniment to a story, rather than a performance part that really had an in-your-face look, an in-your-face position and attitude. So we paralleled to some degrees the videos that were being done for rock performers who were doing their performance. We have a little caption on the bottom which gave the name and the band on everything, whether it was Jem and the Holograms or whether it was the Misfits. But also the attitude then became a performance that was to camera and in the face of the girl who's sitting at home watching it, and with a real drive, with a real attitude, with a real lot of intensity. And I think that was one of the successes of Jem, was this combination of the two different styles and talents working on the music and working on the scripts.
Listen up, you take heed. There's no way I'm letting you succeed.
We wanted to make sure that the music videos that we created for the show were different than in the look than the look of the adventure story that wrapped around the music videos.
We weren't quite happy with the way the songs sequences were going. We just didn't think there was enough. They seemed too traditional to like the rest of the storyboard and everything else. And we asked at one point for Will Meugniot to be put in charge specifically just of the songs. And so his whole job at one particular point was just focusing completely on the song sequences.
They were very ambitious productions, and they just kind of let me do what I wanted to do.
He brought a new conceptual art design to the videos, and which gave them a lot of flair, and he did it in grand style.
There would be at least a click track, which would just be a rough vocal. Sometimes they'd be finished depending on where it was in the schedule. But there'd also be a script, and in the script, Christy or Roger or whoever was writing it would put a description in this sequence. Pizzazz fantasizes about what it would be like to do this or that. So I would kind of go over the context of the song in the show and figure out what needed to be done to support the story elements later in the episode, make sure we had visuals that wouldn't just be throwaway things, but would actually have some context and lend greater context to the stuff around it. On a daily basis, I'd be preparing songs to hand out, editing the storyboards. When film started coming in, I'd be helping cut the film for my musical sequences, while Jim Duffy was doing the heavy lifting of actually doing the show. He was responsible for about 20 minutes a week, and I was responsible for about 2 or 3 minutes a week. But the songs, as you'll see from the storyboards, we burned through a lot of material on them, and so I was probably doing between 60 and 100 pages of storyboard a week just on the songs. And because the demand was to be visually compelling and do something different than had been done in animation before, it was a lot of work. I'd been a big fan of anime, and I was employing a lot of anime techniques where you would keep things in the camera where you could, and you would animate only when you had to. And so you'll see a lot of them, if you actually look at them, the motion that you think you're seeing is from multiplaning background elements and things rather than character animation, because that was a lot safer. It was hard to get good drawings of the girls where they were consistently pretty. So I always tried to make sure that we had 2 or 3 shot setups that you could work in ways under the camera that you would maximize what you're getting for the time. The big influence when I was doing those was, first of all, the Cars video about You Might Think. And then secondly, there was a Japanese series, Urusei Yatsura, that's never really caught on big here. But their title sequences and end credit sequences were just hugely influential to me. And I gave all the storyboard artists copies of the Urusei Yatsura titles because they were the first thing I'd seen with animation using pop tracks where the animation actually made sense next to the lyric.
North and south, east and west,
hard thing with the sequences was just coming up with something fresh constantly. I mean, I think by the time the episodes got up around episode 40 or so, you're starting to see more redundancy, just as you did in the whole music video industry. Because it's difficult to keep coming up with fresh things that work, because there are certain shots that I found would always work, like the move into the eye or the move into the lips, because of the emotional nature of the material. And as we were going along, more and more of the artists started using those signature shots as crutches. And so I would try to break people out of that.
This is me, how I like to be, take it or leave it. I am free, how I like to be, take it or leave it.
Will hired a lot of very talented storyboard artists and really worked to get the beats of the song integrated into what was going on. Victoria Jensen, who went on to work, was one of the directors on the first Shrek movie, was one of the storyboard artists on the song sequences. And the stuff she did was just amazing.
Vicky, I just hand it to her and say, go. And a lot of the guys, I would do thumbnails for it. But we had a really good board crew on that, where, I had Larry Houston, and I had Frank Parr, who's like now the main Marvel animation director, and I had Boyd Kirkland, and Mike Vosberg. It's a litany of anybody who pretty much went on to become a producer, director, or title designer for the studios worked on the Gem songs with me. It was just a really gifted group of people, and it was a lot of fun.
We were able to have that sort of talent at our disposal, and if it was not up to snuff, Will would work on them and correct that and really make things work. But, the song sequences, once he got involved in them, I think really took a step up and really got to be some pretty amazing sequences.
One of the interesting things happened when we first started the animation on Gem was that Gem was conceived, and Hasbro did the initial art treatment on Gem, but as it's really, and the holograms were created in a really glamorous way. They had a lot of this 80s hair, and they had this really great look about them, and they were sexy in a way that other cartoon characters hadn't been before. And the faces were beautiful. I mean, they were really beautiful for animated characters. They were really beautiful. So the Toei in Japan was doing the animation for us, the physical animation. And when we first saw their animation of Gem, well, the faces kind of looked like anime, and so we were talking with Marvel Entertainment, who was our production partner on Gem, and so was Gem, Sunbow and Marvel Entertainment produced the show, and they sent one of their key artists over to Japan to say, look, anime is fine, but what we really want it is to look like this. And taught them exactly how to draw the faces of Gem and the hologram and the Misfits so that they really looked the way we wanted them to look, and they got it. I mean, they got it, and it came out fine. But we went through that first initial process of seeing it looking quite different than what we envisioned the faces to look like, and then so what went on the screen was exactly the way we wanted it to be.
We were so conscious, and Hasbro was so conscious of wanting to make sure that the girls looked glamorous and everything. I think there was a lot more conscious detail given to, how do these people look? Are they unmodeled? How does the makeup look? How does we were really putting a lot of effort into making sure that, certainly in the costume design, Deborah Pugh at Marvel was designing costumes, and I know she was going through fashion magazines all the time and trying to really pick out, and adapt, popular, trendy types of outfits. And I think that show looks as good as it did because Deborah did such a great job of designing those costumes and really making it have its own style that, I don't think anybody's put that kind of work into since in terms of costume design.
In those days, we really didn't do animatics for anything because it was expensive because you actually had to go under camera with film. And so every once in a while with a title or something you would, but on week-to-week production, you'd never do an animatic. And so the boards would leave my hands and then they go over to the Marvel direction department. And in animation, those directors are sheet timers where they take the action of the storyboard and the soundtrack and they break down how many frames it takes for something to happen. Like if somebody's raising their hand, you figure out like that's 6 frames to do that or 12 frames or whatever. And so the sheet timers would do it, and we were very fortunate. Like, we had some really good directors. Like, one of my favorites was Stan Phillips, who had his own little commercial house. And like me, Stan was interested in how we could expand the use of camera in the thing. And so sometimes I've come up with things that would be really hard to visualize how you could execute it. And I could sit down with Stan and Jim and Karen Peterson and some of the more proactive directors, and we could actually figure out how we could do shots anybody else wasn't doing.
Oh no, she's going for the ferry. She'll never make it.
Don't count on it. The Rockin' Roadster has plenty of room. So long, sucker!
All of us were trying to push to expand the filmic vocabulary of cartoons because, you know, if you look at a 1970s cartoon versus a mid-80s cartoon, there's a huge difference, and it's that generational shift of people who are trying to do the most rather than do the most efficient.
I've never done this before, so I'm not sure what the proper way...
Jeff, you scared me half to death.
Sorry, I had to talk to you in private.
So after the sheets were done, it would go overseas, come back with the animation, and then we'd start looking at the animation for retakes, like where things are wrong, like where there's paint flashes or the animation is mistimed. And so then you call the retakes, then you work with the editor, and then you work around the things that aren't quite right and figure out how you're going to edit things to fix it, how to get things to hit the beats better. And we were very lucky we had Al Breitenbach as our editor, and Al was just a great guy to work with, and also for me as a new director then, very, very educational to work with. He'd just come off of being one of the main editors at Universal's live action division, and he really knew how to edit well.
We're in luck! No damage to the bridge!
Oh, great. We can cross.
It's another earthquake!
The first thing I saw actually was the main title because we were developing that in-house. And they were taking the theme from the advertising, and I remember, you know, taking clips, and I think Will may have storyboarded that out too.
It's interesting because unique for the time, it was actually fully rotoscoped. And in fact, my boss on the project that I'm currently working on, David Corbett, had been the producer on that for the Korean animation studio. And he had actually hired professional dancers, and I didn't have time to go to the shoot, but they actually shot the whole gem video live. It was interesting because I suddenly was given the opportunity to do something where the visuals tied with the music. And so I spent a lot of time with the Gem song, counting out the beats and looking where the music ascended and descended. And if you look at the title, the action all largely is curved to match the flow of the music. And that was my first big thing of doing something like that.
I've been rereading scripts for the first time in a very long time. And I'm kind of re-experiencing the joy that I had at the time when I first created these, and how much fun it was, and how much fun I had with the characters and the relationships. And I read the music awards, and I really love that. And I read the talent search, and I love the way it came out. And I read A Father Should Be, which was our ending show, our last show. And I was like, oh, God, yeah, I remember how much I loved that episode. And I remember how much I loved the episodes up front where it was all new and fresh and just starting to happen. And a lot of that energy is coming back to me.
Caring people are people with dreams who go to extremes to fight for those dreams. Why, yeah.
Do you like it? It's the best thing I've ever seen.
Just like you, people who care, they're just like you.
One of my favorite shows was Riot's Hope because I kind of felt like Riot, up to the point that we had seen him in that show, was kind of acting like an egotistical jerk. And in writing that story, one of the things I was really trying to do was to kind of show you his backstory and show you what made him the character he is and why he's as egotistical as he is and what his background is. So I kind of felt like I was able to humanize him a little more and make him a little more sympathetic and make you think, okay, well, maybe this guy is not quite as bad as we think he is, or maybe there's reasons the way he is. And Boyd Kirkland, who was storyboard one of the acts of that show, came up to me afterwards. And usually, you know, the board artist may appreciate it. He may get a comment here and there, but he actually made a point to come to me and say how much he liked that show. And I think that show also kind of speaks to creative people, because in Wright's background, he's getting a lot of flack from his father, and he really has to kind of struggle to make his initial music on the streets of Europe and everything. And I think that a lot of artists identify with that, because it's not easy. You get a lot of resistance from family and friends who are like, you know, why don't you get a real job? You know, what are you doing? What are you thinking? You know, and so I think that other creative people could appreciate that episode as well as, you know, the fan watching the show, because they, I think, identified with that.
First winter was a tough one. We were forced to play in the streets to make enough money to eat. But slowly, the crowds began to grow. Life was hard, but we were determined to make it.
Just the very nature of the show allowed you to do more things, like the relationship between the characters and their fathers, or the characters and their mother. I mean, I wrote an episode called Father's Day, where we were able to focus on the fact that Kimber was kind of freaking out because they wanted her to write a song for Father's Day, and her father was dead, and she had to actually, you know, focus and deal with the fact that her father was dead, and sort of come to some kind of closure with that.
It's hard to raise a child on your own. She's been uncontrollable since her mother walked out on us.
Pizzazza's mother left?
Years ago. Ever since then, it's like Phyllis resents the entire world. I don't think she ever learned to accept the loss of a parent.
It's hard to accept.
I know it is, Kimber.
The Day the Music died, I really enjoyed, because I was sort of inspired by She's Gotta Have It, which is a Spike Lee movie that came out around that time, and sort of the challenge of telling a story from the perspective of all the different characters and having each of them pick up the thread of the storyline and bring the story forward through their emotions and through what they witnessed and their portion of what they saw that leads you to the rest of the adventure. And I probably would not have been able to pull this off if I hadn't been in-house and able to do this as a producer as well as being the writer on the show. But the way we started that show, which was different from all the other shows, where the main title started to run, and then you sort of saw it jerk and stop, and like it burned out, and then Kimber comes on and says, "I'm sorry, there's not going to be a show today."
Come on and be a gem girl, gem star. Gem's my name.
There won't be a story today. Gem's gone. Jerica's gone. And Gem and the Holograms will never play again.
One of the fans I talked to a couple of years ago about GemCon, he said he saw that episode and he was really like shocked when he saw that, because he really thought there wasn't going to be a Gem episode that day. So obviously it was effective, and obviously it really worked. And you know, it was just great to be able to integrate all those things into the production and to pull off something that was difficult to do. And I think Al may have edited that opening sequence too. And again, he did a great job. I mean, it really, you get the impression the camera run down and the film burn up, and now we're stuck here without Gem or any episode.
I don't know if I could actually pin it down any one particular episode that's a favorite. The Music Awards meant a lot to me because we dealt with a difficult issue, which was runaway kids, and I was very, very pleased that they allowed me to deal with it in a way that felt more realistic to me. In other words, we didn't go for some kind of a sappy, sugary, somehow it all ends up being this wonderful, happy ending. Instead, the message was to kids, get help, get off the streets, find someone who can help you. Not just, if you go home, everything will be wonderful, because in most cases, that's not going to be true. And the really nice thing was that we ran a help number at the end of the episode, and there was a runaway switchboard or something like that, and they were just inundated with calls. And I heard wonderful, wonderful stories about kids, really young kids like even 10 years old, who had run away and called this number and were helped and got back to the family or got help or whatever, and they were just buried with calls. And it was the power of the show to reach out and do something good. So that meant a lot to me.
You can't keep on running forever. I don't mean to butt in or nothing, but you need somebody to talk to. Somebody who can help you work things out.
Yeah, sure. Somebody else to lecture me.
Doesn't have to be that way. Here, call this place. They'll give you good advice. Try and help you.
Well, I guess I could give it a try.
You don't have to go home, but you really should talk to someone.
Then it was easy to see the power. Once you do something like run that help number and that organization is buried with calls, you suddenly step back and say, wow, the show is having an impact. The show is really reaching people. My belief is that Jem endures because it's about the human heart and the human spirit. When you strip away everything else and just get down to the character relationships, it's about people caring about one another, helping one another, being true to one another, doing the right thing.
For Jem, I think the whole idea of being truly outrageous and having it be a positive thing in your life and positive in your family and with your friends and everything is an idea that still holds true today.
Everybody working on that show, I think the writers and the story editors and the artists and everything, were really working from their heart. It wasn't like today where you kind of get the impression everybody has to test market everything and everybody has to show it to an audience and see what they think and get their feedback and decide how they want to react. We didn't really believe in talking down to the viewers. We didn't believe in trying to be, treating them as if they were stupid. I mean, we were really just trying to do good, interesting stories.
Animation is important, the quality of animation is important, but at the end of the day, its story, its character, those are the things that drive a show to being a success or not being a success.
It was wonderful because we were able to have ideas and bring them to fruition and see them on the screen and have a lot of liberty, a lot of freedom in the development of those ideas.
Jem was something that was my opportunity to really let myself go and have this creative freedom and play and do all these wonderful character relationships in a way that has almost never happened again since. It was a couple of great, great years, just something I really will always treasure.
Personally, looking back on it now, I'm very glad to have taken part in this project because it has had great resonance over the years, and I think it has actually grown in resonance over the years. And that's always important from an artistic standpoint. You want to feel like you're writing something that on some level is going to be remembered by somebody.
Of the shows I worked on, Jem was really the favorite show I ever worked on.
It was a very exciting time for us and really a breakthrough in a lot of ways in terms of the series and in terms of children's animation.
Jem was a great experience. I loved everybody that worked on it, and it was really a good project.
I think that Jem had magical combinations of music and look and art and talent and everything else, and it had all this heart and this spirit underneath it, and I think that's something that really shines through.
As for a Jem, a new series or a movie, that's what they do, right? They make movies out of these things. Fine with me. I just, as long as they do it even better and not worse.
I just hope if they ever do revive it that they can recapture some of that same magic. But there were a lot of elements that came together and a lot of creative talent that really came together that made it a superior show, I think.
Show's over, Synergy.